The emergency beacon cut through the vast darkness of space like a desperate scream. Ambassador Zethkar of the Galactic Council received the transmission aboard his flagship, the Eternal Wisdom, as it traveled through the neutral zone between human and Korthak territories. The message was unlike anything he had encountered in his 300 years of diplomatic service. Council Priority Alpha. The transmission began in the Universal Trade Language. This is Deep Space Monitor Station Omega-7. We have detected massive energy signatures from human space. Something has changed. The humans, they're different now. Zethkar's 4 arms moved across his command console with practiced efficiency. His species, the Veltar, had evolved from ancient sea creatures, and their fluid movements reflected their oceanic heritage. His large, dark eyes focused on the incoming data streams as his ship's advanced sensors began analyzing the transmission's origin point. The Veltar had served as neutral mediators in galactic conflicts for millennia. Their natural telepathic abilities, combined with their peaceful nature, made them ideal ambassadors. Zethkar himself had negotiated treaties between dozens of species, always finding common ground where others saw only differences. But humans were different from any species he had encountered. They had burst onto the galactic scene barely 50 years ago, arriving in crude but effective ships that somehow managed to travel between stars despite their primitive technology. Most species required centuries to develop faster-than-light travel, but humans had done it in mere decades after their first space flights. The Galactic Council had been watching humanity with growing concern. These newcomers were unpredictable, emotional, and dangerously innovative. They refused to follow established protocols, ignored ancient traditions, and somehow managed to solve problems that had stumped galactic civilization for thousands of years. Sir, his aide, Kesara, approached with visible concern rippling across her bioluminescent skin. The energy readings from human space are unprecedented. Our sensors are detecting weapon discharges that register beyond our measurement capabilities. Zethkar studied the data flowing across his screens. The numbers made no sense. According to their instruments, the humans were generating energy outputs that should have been impossible for their level of technology. Even the ancient Korthak Empire, with their godlike powers, had never produced readings like these. The Korthaks were the oldest and most powerful civilization in known space. They claimed to have existed since before the formation of the galaxy itself, and their technology was so advanced it seemed like magic to younger species. Their ships could destroy entire star systems with a thought, and their leaders possessed abilities that defied the laws of physics. For the past year, tensions had been escalating between humanity and the Korthak Empire. It had started with a simple misunderstanding over mining rights in a distant system. The humans had established a colony on a planet the Korthaks considered sacred, though they had never bothered to mark it as such or inform anyone of its significance. When the Korthaks demanded the humans leave, the response had been typically human. Why? This simple question had sparked a crisis. The Korthaks were accustomed to instant obedience from younger species. Their very presence usually induced fear and submission. But humans seemed immune to their intimidation tactics, treating the godlike beings with the same casual irreverence they showed everyone else. Diplomatic attempts had failed spectacularly. The human representative, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chun, had actually laughed when the Korthak Emperor had demonstrated his power by casually restructuring matter at the molecular level. When asked why she found it amusing, she had replied, "My daughter did something similar for her high school science fair." The Korthaks had been insulted beyond measure. No species had ever shown them such disrespect. They had issued ultimatums, demonstrated their power, and threatened consequences that had brought entire civilizations to their knees. The humans had responded by asking if they could get copies of the technical specifications for the matter restructuring process, because it looked pretty useful. As the situation deteriorated, both sides had begun military preparations. The Galactic Council had tried to mediate, but neither side seemed interested in compromise. The humans insisted they had done nothing wrong, and refused to abandon their colony. The court hacks demanded not only evacuation, but formal submission and tribute as compensation for the insult. Now, according to the emergency transmission, something had finally triggered active conflict. Zethkar felt a chill run through his body as he contemplated the implications. A war between humans and court hacks could devastate the galaxy. The court hacks had the power to sterilize entire worlds, while the humans had already demonstrated an alarming talent for asymmetric warfare and technological innovation. Set course for the human colony world of New Geneva, Zethkar ordered. Maximum speed, and send a priority message to the Council. Tell them we may be looking at the beginning of a galactic war. As the Eternal Wisdom altered course and engaged its hyperdrive, Zethkar reflected on his previous encounters with humans. He had met dozens of them during various diplomatic functions, and each interaction had left him more puzzled than the last. They were physically unimpressive compared to most galactic species. Small, fragile, with limited sensory capabilities and no natural weapons to speak of. Yet they had somehow become one of the fastest-growing civilizations in known space. Their colonies were spreading rapidly. Their technology was advancing at an unprecedented rate, and their military was earning a reputation for effectiveness that seemed impossible given their limitations. What made humans so dangerous wasn't their technology or their physical capabilities. It was their mindset. Every other species in the galaxy had developed within certain parameters, following predictable patterns of evolution and social development. Humans seemed to operate outside those patterns entirely. They had no respect for authority based solely on power or age. They questioned everything, challenged assumptions that other species considered fundamental truths, and refused to accept that anything was impossible. Where other species saw insurmountable obstacles, humans saw interesting problems to solve. The court hacks represented everything humans seemed to despise: ancient power, unquestioned authority, and demands for submission without justification. It was almost inevitable that these two forces would clash eventually. Zethkar had hoped it could be prevented through careful diplomacy, but, apparently, events had moved beyond the point of peaceful resolution. 3 hours later, the Eternal Wisdom dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Geneva system. What Zethkar saw there defied explanation. The space around New Geneva was filled with debris, but it wasn't human debris. Massive chunks of what appeared to be Korthak vessels floated in expanding clouds, their characteristic golden hulls twisted and shattered. Energy discharges were still crackling across some of the larger pieces, suggesting the battle had ended recently. But the human colony appeared untouched. New Geneva hung in space like a blue-green jewel, its orbital installations intact and functioning normally. Ships moved between the planet and its space stations in regular patterns, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Sir," Kesaray's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm reading the remains of at least 12 Korthak battleships. Their flagship, the Divine Retribution, appears to have been vaporized." Zethkar stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. The Divine Retribution had been one of the most powerful vessels in known space, capable of destroying entire fleets single-handedly. Its captain, Lord Vexhai, was considered one of the greatest military minds in Korthak history. The ship's defenses should have been impenetrable to any known weapon. "Are there any human casualties?" he asked. "Sir, I'm not detecting any human debris at all. Their entire fleet appears to be intact and operational." This was impossible. The court hacks didn't lose battles. They had never lost a major engagement in recorded galactic history. Their technology was so advanced that most species couldn't even comprehend how it worked. A handful of human ships, no matter how well-designed, shouldn't have been able to defeat a full Korthak battle group. "Open a communication channel to New Geneva Control," Zethkar ordered. The response came immediately, in a cheerful, casual tone that seemed to characterize all human communications. "New Geneva Control, to unknown vessel. This is Traffic Controller Lisa Martinez. How can we help you today? This is Ambassador Zethkar of the Galactic Council, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm here to investigate reports of a military engagement in this system. Oh, you mean the Korthak thing? Lisa's voice carried a note of mild annoyance. Yeah, that happened a few hours ago. Really inconsiderate of them to attack during shift change. Made scheduling a real pain. Zethkar exchanged glances with his aide. The human was discussing the destruction of a Korthak battle fleet as if it were a minor inconvenience. Could you provide details about what occurred? Sure thing. The Korthak showed up around 0800 local time, started making threats about divine retribution and eternal punishment, the usual stuff. Admiral Rodriguez tried to explain that we were having our morning coffee and could they please come back later, but they were being really pushy about it. And then? Well, they started shooting, so we had to defend ourselves. The whole thing was over in about 20 minutes. Really put us behind schedule for the morning asteroid mining runs. 20 minutes. A full Korthak battle group had been destroyed in 20 minutes, and the humans were complaining about mining delays. Ambassador, Lisa continued, you're welcome to visit if you want the full briefing. Admiral Rodriguez said she'd be happy to discuss the technical details with any interested parties. Just be aware that we're still cleaning up the debris field, so approach vectors might be a bit congested. As the Eternal Wisdom approached New Geneva, Zethkar tried to process what he was seeing and hearing. The humans had just accomplished something that should have been impossible, and they were treating it like a routine maintenance issue. Either they were completely insane, or they possessed capabilities that the Galactic Council had severely underestimated. Looking at the twisted remains of Korthak vessels drifting through space, Zethkar was beginning to suspect it was the latter. And if that was true, then the galaxy had just become a very different and very dangerous place. The question now wasn't whether humans could defend themselves against the Korthak Empire. The question was what they would do next, and whether anyone could stop them if they decided the galaxy needed to change. Admiral Maria Rodriguez was exactly what Zethkar had expected from a human military commander. Direct, practical, and completely unimpressed by his diplomatic credentials. She met him in the Orbital Command Center above New Geneva, a utilitarian space station that contrasted sharply with the ornate vessels most species preferred. Ambassador, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome to New Geneva. Coffee. Zethkar accepted the beverage with two of his hands while his other arms managed his recording devices. The coffee was bitter and stimulating, much like its creators. Around them, human technicians worked at consoles, displaying tactical information and debris analysis. The atmosphere was relaxed, almost casual, as if they hadn't just made galactic history. Admiral Rodriguez, I must ask directly, how did you defeat a Korthak battle group? Our records indicate they've never suffered a major defeat in over 10,000 years. Rodriguez leaned back in her chair and shrugged, a gesture Zethkar had learned indicated human indifference. They're not as tough as they pretend to be. Their technology is impressive, sure, but they've been coasting on reputation for so long they forgot how to actually fight. She activated a holographic display showing the battle from multiple angles. Zethkar watched in fascination as the engagement unfolded. The Korthak ships had approached in their traditional formation, massive golden vessels that gleamed with internal energy. Their weapons began charging, creating the spectacular light shows that had terrorized species for millennia. The human response had been swift and precise. Small, dark ships had emerged from concealed positions throughout the system, moving with coordination that suggested instantaneous communication across vast distances. Their weapons didn't create impressive displays of power. Instead, they fired brief, focused pulses that seemed almost insignificant compared to the Korthak energy cannons. Watch this part carefully, Rodriguez said, pointing to a section of the display. The Korthaks always open with their intimidation protocol. Big lights, impressive energy signatures, threats about divine retribution. It works great against species that fight with emotion and fear. On the display, the lead Korthak vessel was broadcasting its typical ultimatum: surrender immediately or face annihilation. The human response had been a data packet containing what appeared to be technical specifications. "What did you send them?" Zethkar asked. "The complete molecular structure of their hull plating, power distribution schematics, and the harmonic frequencies of their shield generators. Took our analysis computers about 30 seconds to figure out their weaknesses." Zethkar's four hearts skipped several beats. "You analyzed their technology in 30 seconds. Our AI systems are pretty good at pattern recognition. The court hacks use the same basic designs they've had for thousands of years. Really beautiful engineering, actually, but they never update their security protocols. Once you understand how their systems work, defeating them is just a matter of applied physics." The battle replay continued. As the Korthak weapons reached full charge, the human ships fired their focused pulses at specific points on the enemy hulls. The results were devastating. Korthak shields failed instantly, their power cores destabilized, and their mighty vessels began tearing themselves apart from within. "Those pulse weapons," Zethkar said, his voice barely steady. "What are they?" "Resonance disruptors. We call them harmony breakers. They identify the natural frequency of whatever they're aimed at, and then broadcast the exact opposite waveform. Works on any organized matter structure. Ships, shields, weapons, even planetary defenses if you scale them up enough." Zethkar felt his skin change color in involuntary alarm patterns. "You can destroy planets?" "Well, but why would we want to?" "Planets are useful. We prefer building things to breaking them." Rodriguez paused the display and looked directly at the ambassador. "That's what the court hacks never understood about us. They kept threatening to destroy our colonies, our ships, our people. They thought fear would make us submit. But it didn't. Of course not. Humans don't respond well to threats. We respond to threats by eliminating whatever's making them." She gestured toward the debris field visible through the station's viewports. "The court hacks wanted to demonstrate their power, so we demonstrated ours." As Zethkar absorbed this information, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Human technicians moved with efficient urgency, their casual demeanor shifting instantly to focused professionalism. "Admiral," one of them called out, "we're receiving multiple hyperspace signatures. Large fleet incoming from Korthak space." Rodriguez stood and moved to his central console. "How many ships?" "Initial count suggests over 200 vessels, ma'am. Dreadnought class and larger. They'll reach the system perimeter in 6 hours. Zethkar felt his diplomatic composure cracking. "Admiral, that's the entire Korthak First Fleet. Emperor Thekmor himself commands that formation. If they're bringing their full military might to bear, then they're about to make the same mistake their advance force did," Rodriguez interrupted. She turned to her communications officer. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we need the pacification fleet here within 4 hours." "The pacification fleet?" Zethkar asked. "Our rapid response unit, designed specifically for situations where diplomacy has failed and someone needs to be convinced to reconsider their position." Rodriguez's expression was calm, but Zethkar noticed the human tendency for their eyes to become very still when they were angry. "We really hoped it wouldn't come to this." Over the next few hours, Zethkar witnessed preparations for a battle that would reshape galactic politics forever. Human ships began arriving through hyperspace jumps that seemed to violate several laws of physics. The vessels were unlike anything in his diplomatic database, sleek, dark, and somehow unsettling to look at. "Ambassador," Rodriguez said during the preparations, "I want you to understand something. Humans didn't want this fight. We've been trying to coexist peacefully since we first encountered other species. We follow galactic law, respect territorial boundaries, and always attempt diplomatic solutions first. But we're not going to be bullied by anyone, no matter how old they are or how powerful they claim to be. The court hacks think they can threaten us into submission because that's how they've always done things. They're about to learn that humans are different. The human fleet that assembled around New Geneva defied every conventional understanding of military strategy. Instead of massive battleships bristling with obvious weapons, they deployed hundreds of smaller vessels that seemed almost fragile by galactic standards. But Zethkar had seen what those fragile ships could do to Korthak armor. "How many ships do you have?" he asked. "In this system?" "About 300 active vessels, plus another 1,000 in support roles. Globally." Rodriguez smiled, and Zethkar was reminded that humans showing their teeth was not necessarily a friendly gesture. "Let's just say we've been busy since we joined the galactic community." When the Korthak First Fleet arrived, their formation was magnificent and terrifying. Massive dreadnoughts larger than cities moved in perfect coordination, their hulls blazing with divine fire. Emperor Thekmor's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was a marvel of engineering that dwarfed entire space stations. The Emperor's voice boomed across all communication frequencies, carrying the weight of cosmic authority that had subjugated countless civilizations. "Humans of the fallen colony, New Geneva, you have defied the will of the Eternal Empire and destroyed vessels blessed by divine power. Your transgression cannot be forgiven. Surrender yourselves for judgment, and your deaths will be swift. Continue this futile resistance, and we will erase every trace of your species from existence." The human response was immediate and completely unexpected. Instead of Admiral Rodriguez, the communication came from a young-sounding human female. "Emperor Thekmor, this is Dr. Sarah Chun, Director of Human Xenological Studies. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your species' approach to energy manipulation is quite fascinating from an academic perspective. You dare address us with such casual disrespect, creature? We are gods among mortals." "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. See, we've been studying your technology, your history, your claimed divine powers. We've reached some interesting conclusions. On the human fleet's communication channels, a data transmission began broadcasting toward every ship in the system, both human and Korthak." Zethkar watched in growing amazement as detailed scientific analysis filled his screens. Dr. Chin's voice continued, calm and professorial. "Your divine powers are actually quite clever applications of quantum field manipulation and dimensional energy tapping. Impressive work? Definitely, but hardly supernatural. My research team has been able to replicate most of your capabilities using standard human engineering principles." The effect on the Korthak fleet was immediate and profound. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for thousands of years began to drift slightly. Energy signatures fluctuated. For the first time in recorded history, Korthak military discipline was showing cracks. "Impossible." Emperor Thekmor's voice carried a note of something that might have been uncertainty. "Our powers are beyond the comprehension of lesser species." "Oh, I comprehend them just fine. In fact, I've made some improvements. Would you like a demonstration?" Without waiting for an answer, the human fleet began to move. But instead of attacking, they started to sing. It was a sound unlike anything Zethkar had ever heard. Hundreds of ships broadcasting a coordinated harmonic frequency that seemed to resonate through space itself. The song was beautiful, haunting, and utterly alien to galactic warfare. As the harmony reached its crescendo, something impossible happened. The Korthak ships began to glow, not with their own divine fire, but with a soft, silvery light that seemed to come from within their very atoms. The Emperor's flagship, the mighty Eternal Dominion, started to change. Its golden hull became translucent, revealing the intricate networks of energy and matter that comprised its structure. Every system, every power conduit, every supposedly divine technology became visible and comprehensible. The Korthak's most closely guarded secrets were laid bare before the watching galaxy. "You see, Dr. Chen's voice continued over the cosmic harmony. The difference between gods and mortals isn't power. It's understanding. You've had these abilities for so long you've forgotten how they work. We figured them out in 6 months." Emperor Thekmor's response was a roar of rage and disbelief that shook space itself. "You will pay for this blasphemy." The human singing stopped. The silvery light faded. But the damage was done. Every species in the galaxy now had detailed scans of Korthak technology, complete with technical specifications and operational weaknesses. Admiral Rodriguez's voice cut through the cosmic silence that followed. "Emperor Thekmor, you have two choices. You can order your fleet to withdraw, and we can discuss the situation like civilized beings. Or you can attack, and we'll be forced to defend ourselves again. And if we choose to fight, then you'll discover that humans aren't just good at understanding how things work. We're also very good at improving them." As if to demonstrate the point, the human fleet suddenly doubled in size. Ships that had been invisible began materializing from what Zethkar realized must have been some form of cloaking technology. The new vessels were larger, more sophisticated, and radiated an energy signature that made his instruments emit warning alarms. The message was clear. The humans had been holding back. The easy destruction of the advanced force hadn't been their best effort. It had been a gentle warning. Emperor Thekmor, supreme ruler of the oldest and most powerful civilization in the galaxy, found himself facing a choice no Korthak had ever contemplated: submit or face annihilation at the hands of a species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Korthak Empire hesitated. The silence that followed Admiral Rodriguez's ultimatum stretched across the New Geneva system like a held breath. Zethkar watched from the observation deck of a human command station as two of the galaxy's most powerful forces faced each other in a standoff that would determine the future of interstellar civilization. Emperor Thekmor's response, when it came, carried 10,000 years of absolute authority and divine certainty. "We do not negotiate with lesser species. We do not retreat. We are the eternal empire, and our will is law." The massive Korthak fleet began moving into attack formation, their golden hulls blazing with gathering energy. "You will learn why the galaxy fears our name." Dr. Sarah Chin's voice came through the communications array again, still carrying that calm, academic tone that somehow made her words more unsettling than any threat. "Emperor, I really think you should reconsider. My analysis indicates that direct confrontation would be inadvisable for your forces." "Your analysis means nothing, creature. Observe the true power of the divine." The Korthak First Fleet opened fire simultaneously, creating a display of destructive energy that had never been matched in galactic history. Beams of condensed starfire lanced through space, each one carrying enough power to sterilize a world. The combined assault should have vaporized the entire human fleet in seconds. Instead, the human ships simply weren't there anymore. Zethkar's sensors registered the impossible. The entire human fleet had somehow stepped sideways through space itself, emerging from what his instruments identified as temporary dimensional rifts. The Korthak barrage passed harmlessly through empty space while the humans materialized in new positions throughout the system. "Phase shifting," Admiral Rodriguez explained to Zethkar's shocked expression. "We learned it from studying your species' quantum biology. Actually, turns out consciousness and dimensional manipulation are closely related. We just scaled it up for starship use." Before the court hacks could reposition for a second assault, the human counterattack began. But it wasn't like any military engagement in recorded history. Instead of weapons, the human ships began broadcasting what sounded like music. It was complex, mathematical, beautiful in a way that transcended species barriers. Every ship in the human fleet contributed its voice to a cosmic symphony that seemed to resonate with the fundamental frequencies of space itself. The music grew more complex, more layered, building towards something that Zethkar's mind couldn't quite comprehend. "What are you doing?" Emperor Thekmor's voice now carried a note of uncertainty that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. Dr. Chun answered while the symphony continued to build around them. "We're composing, Emperor. Music is mathematics, mathematics is physics, and physics is reality. If you understand the relationships well enough, You can conduct reality like an orchestra. The music reached a crescendo, and suddenly, every Korthak ship in the fleet began to experience cascade failures. Not from weapons, not from external attack, but from their own systems turning against them. Power cores that had run for millennia began fluctuating wildly. Gravitational compensators lost synchronization with local spacetime. Life support systems started playing the same mathematical symphony that the human fleet was broadcasting. Impossible. Thekmore's roar of rage shook space itself. Our technology is beyond your understanding. Actually, it's quite elegant once you grasp the underlying principles, Dr. Chen replied conversationally. You use quantum consciousness to interface directly with fundamental forces. Very sophisticated, but it has vulnerabilities. Like any instrument, it can be retuned. One by one, Korthak vessels began losing power and drifting helplessly through space. Their mighty weapons fell silent. Their divine fire dimmed to ember glow. The unstoppable fleet that had conquered countless worlds was being neutralized without a single shot being fired. But Emperor Thekmore himself was not finished. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, began to change. The massive vessel started to fold in on itself, condensing and transforming until it became something that hurt to look at directly. Energy patterns that defied three-dimensional understanding rippled around the ship, as it assumed a form that belonged more to mythology than to any known technology. You dare challenge gods? The Emperor's voice now carried harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears entirely, speaking directly to consciousness. Witness true divine power. The transformed flagship became a nexus of cosmic force. Reality itself began to bend around it, creating space-time distortions that pulled at nearby ships with gravitational forces that should have been impossible. This was power beyond technology, beyond science as most species understood it. For the first time since the engagement began, Zethkar saw human uncertainty. Admiral Rodriguez was conferring rapidly with her technical staff, their casual confidence replaced by intense focus. "Admiral," one of her officers called out, "the Emperor's gone full transcendent. We're reading energy signatures that match our theoretical models for direct reality manipulation. Can we counter it? Not with conventional methods, ma'am. He's operating on a level that's basically magic." Dr. Chen's voice cut through the bridge chatter. Actually, it's not magic. It's applied consciousness physics taken to its logical extreme. The court hacks learned to use their minds as direct interfaces with the quantum substrate of reality. Can we do that? Not individually, no. Human consciousness isn't structured for that kind of direct interface. But collectively, Chun paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a note of excitement that was somehow more terrifying than any battle cry. "Admiral, I need you to patch me through to the entire fleet. Every human in the system. Dr. Chen, what are you planning?" Emperor Thekmore wants to demonstrate the power of consciousness over reality. Let's show him what human consciousness can accomplish when it works together. What happened next would become the subject of academic study and philosophical debate for generations. Dr. Chun began speaking to every human in the new Geneva system simultaneously, her words carrying instructions that seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to something deeper. "Everyone, I need you to think about home. Not just your physical homes, but the concept of home itself. Safety, family, the place where you belong. Think about all the homes humanity has ever built, from the first caves to the colonies spreading across the stars. Across hundreds of ships and space stations, thousands of humans began to focus their thoughts on a single concept. But it wasn't just thinking. Zethkar's telepathic abilities let him sense the growing resonance as human minds began to synchronize in a way that should have been impossible for their species. Now, think about protection. Think about defending what you love. Think about standing between harm and home, no matter what the cost. The mental resonance was becoming visible now, a soft golden glow that began emanating from every human ship and station. But Unlike the harsh divine fire of the court hacks, this light felt warm, protective, nurturing. And now Dr. Chen's voice carried across both communication channels and directly through the growing psychic network. Think about choice. Think about the right to exist freely, to grow, to become whatever we're capable of becoming. Think about the future we're going to build among the stars. The transformation of the human fleet was subtle but profound. Instead of becoming more alien or transcendent, they became more human. Their ships didn't change shape or violate physics. Instead, they began to radiate something that was uniquely terrestrial: hope, determination, and an absolute refusal to surrender. Emperor Thekmor, in his transcendent state, attacked with power that could reshape reality itself. Beams of pure force lanced out from the eternal dominion, carrying enough energy to ignite stars. Each blast struck the human formation with the fury of a cosmic god, and accomplished absolutely nothing. The attacks didn't bounce off shields or get absorbed by defensive systems. They simply didn't matter. The collective will of thousands of humans had somehow made their fleet exist in a state where divine wrath was irrelevant. "This is impossible." Thekmor's voice now carried desperation along with rage. "Nothing can resist the power of transcendent consciousness." Dr. Chen's response came not just through the communication system, but through the psychic resonance that now connected every human in the system. Her words carried the weight of collective human thought. "You're right, Emperor. Nothing can resist transcendent consciousness. But you made one crucial error in your calculations." "What error?" "You assumed you were the only one capable of transcendence." The human fleet began to move, not through space, but through possibility itself. They didn't teleport or phase shift. Instead, they simply became present wherever they needed to be, as if distance and location were suggestions rather than laws. Individual consciousness can achieve transcendence through discipline, meditation, and cosmic understanding, Dr. Chen continued. But collective consciousness can achieve transcendence through shared purpose, mutual support, and love. The word love hit Emperor Thekmor like a physical blow. His transformed flagship shuddered, as if the concept itself was somehow toxic to its divine nature. Love is weakness. Love is the delusion of lesser species. Love is connection, the unified human voice replied. Love is the force that binds atoms into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into life. Love is what makes us choose to protect others at the cost of our own safety. Love is what drove us to reach for the stars not for conquest, but for wonder. Emperor Thekmor's attacks became increasingly frantic, reality-warping assaults that should have been able to unmake the human fleet at the quantum level. But each attack was met by a simple, implacable response. Humans choosing to exist despite the cost, choosing to protect what they valued, choosing to continue moving forward no matter what cosmic forces stood against them. "You cannot defeat gods," Thekmor screamed across all dimensions simultaneously. The human response was delivered in Admiral Rodriguez's calm, practical voice. "We're not trying to defeat gods, Emperor. We're trying to show you that divinity isn't about power over others. It's about the choice to create rather than destroy, to protect rather than conquer, to love rather than fear." And if you can't understand that, Dr. Chen added, her voice carrying the weight of collective human determination, then maybe you're not as divine as you think you are. For the first time in his eternal existence, Emperor Thekmor found himself facing a force he couldn't comprehend, couldn't defeat, and couldn't intimidate. The humans weren't fighting him with superior technology or greater power. They were fighting him with something his species had never encountered in 10,000 years of conquest: the absolute refusal to accept that might makes right. And for the first time in his eternal existence, Emperor Thekmor began to feel something he had never experienced before: doubt. The doubt that crept into Emperor Thekmor's transcendent consciousness was like poison in divine veins. For 10,000 years, his certainty had been absolute, his power unquestioned. His was the fundamental law of reality itself. Now, facing the unified resistance of humanity, cracks began to form in the foundations of his cosmic authority. Zethkar watched in fascination and terror as the Emperor's transformed flagship began to fluctuate between states of existence. The eternal dominion would shimmer between its divine, reality-bending form and its original massive hull, as if Thekmor's consciousness could no longer maintain the level of transcendence required for true godhood. This cannot be. Thekmor's voice echoed across dimensions, but the harmonics that had once carried absolute authority now trembled with uncertainty. We are eternal. We are inevitable. We are afraid. Dr. Chen's voice cut through the cosmic declaration like a surgical blade. For the first time in your existence, you're experiencing fear. And fear is incompatible with the kind of transcendent consciousness you're trying to maintain. The human fleet remained motionless in space, but their collective presence had become something that existed beyond mere physical form. They were an idea made manifest. The concept that beings could choose to stand together against overwhelming power, not because they were certain of victory, but because surrender would mean abandoning everything that made them who they were. Fear. Thekmor's laugh shook nearby asteroids into dust. Gods do not fear mortals. Admiral Rodriguez's voice joined the exchange, carrying the practical directness that seemed to characterize all human communications. Emperor, with respect, you're not a god. You're a very old, very powerful being who convinced yourself that age and power equal divinity. There's a difference. Blasphemy. Observation. Dr. Chun corrected. We've studied your species for months now, analyzed your technology, examined your historical records. The court hacks achieved transcendent consciousness through meditation, discipline, and gradual merger with cosmic forces. Impressive, certainly, but reproducible given enough time and understanding. You understand nothing. We understand enough. Your power comes from your ability to interface directly with the quantum substrate of reality using consciousness as a tool. It requires absolute certainty, complete confidence in your own divine nature. Doubt, fear, uncertainty, these break the connection. As if to demonstrate the point, Emperor Thekmor's next reality-warping attack was noticeably weaker than his previous assaults. The beam of pure cosmic force that lanced out from his flagship was still powerful enough to crack moons, but it lacked the absolute, universe-reshaping authority of his earlier strikes. And that, Admiral Rodriguez added, is why you can't defeat us. We're not trying to be gods. We're just trying to be human. And being human means accepting uncertainty, embracing doubt, and choosing to act anyway. The psychological impact on the rest of the Korthak fleet was devastating. These beings had followed Emperor Thekmor for millennia, believing absolutely in his divine nature and cosmic authority. Seeing their God-Emperor struggle against a force he couldn't understand or overcome was shattering their fundamental worldview. Ship by ship, Korthak vessels began powering down their weapons. Not in surrender, but in confusion. Their crews had never experienced a situation where divine will was insufficient to ensure victory. They simply didn't know how to process what they were witnessing. Zethkar found himself in a unique position of observing galactic history being rewritten in real time. His diplomatic training had prepared him for many scenarios, but nothing like this. Two species were engaged in combat on multiple levels simultaneously: physical, technological, psychological, and philosophical. Ambassador, Admiral Rodriguez said, noticing his intense observation. You might want to record this next part. I think it's going to be significant. Dr. Chen's voice resumed, but now it carried a different quality. Instead of scientific analysis or cosmic challenge, she spoke with something that sounded like compassion. Emperor Thekmor, you don't have to be afraid. Fear is just the recognition that something important is at stake. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you conscious of value. We fear nothing, but the Emperor's voice had lost its cosmic harmonics entirely. He was speaking in simple audio now, transmitted through conventional communication systems. Then, why are you fighting so hard to maintain your transcendent state? Why is the idea of being challenged by younger species so threatening to you? The question hung in space like a challenge to existence itself. For long moments, there was no response except the background radiation of stars and the subtle energy signatures of hundreds of ships maintaining their positions. When Thekmor finally answered, his voice was smaller, more mortal than it had been in millennia. Because if we're not gods, then what are we? If our divine nature is merely advanced understanding, if our cosmic power is simply sophisticated technology, then what justification do we have for 10,000 years of conquest? What meaning do our victories have if we are simply old instead of eternal? The admission sent shockwaves through the Korthak fleet. Their emperor had just acknowledged doubt about the fundamental nature of their existence, their history, their identity as a species. Ships that had maintained perfect formation for centuries began to drift as their crews struggled to process the implications. But Dr. Chen's response was gentle, almost kind. Emperor, you don't need divine justification to have value. You don't need to be gods to matter. The Korthak Empire has achieved incredible things. You've mastered technologies that seem miraculous, developed consciousness beyond anything most species can imagine, created a civilization that has endured for millennia. But we conquered. We dominated. We forced submission through power. And that was wrong, Admiral Rodriguez said simply. But it doesn't erase the amazing things your people accomplished. It just means you need to do better going forward. Do better? Emperor, Dr. Chun continued, what if instead of ruling through fear, you tried cooperation? What if instead of demanding submission, you offered partnership? What if instead of insisting on your divine nature, you shared your incredible knowledge with species that could benefit from it? The idea seemed to physically stagger the Emperor's flagship. The massive vessel lurched in space as if the concept of voluntary cooperation was so alien to Korthak thinking that it required fundamental recalibration of their worldview. You would cooperate with us? After we attacked your colony? After we threatened to destroy your species? People make mistakes, Admiral Rodriguez said with a shrug that somehow translated across interstellar distances. The question is whether they're willing to learn from them. Around the new Geneva system, something unprecedented began to happen. Korthak ships started broadcasting queries to their human counterparts. Not demands or ultimatums, but questions. Requests for clarification about human technology, human philosophy, human approaches to problems that the ancient empire had never considered. The transformation of Emperor Thekmor's flagship was gradual, but profound. The reality-warping divine form slowly collapsed back into the conventional hull design, but instead of losing power, it seemed to gain something else. The harsh golden light that had characterized Korthak vessels began to soften, taking on warmer tones that somehow seemed more alive. If we were to abandon our claims of divinity, our demands for submission, Thekmor's voice was hesitant, uncertain in a way that would have been unthinkable hours earlier. Would your species be willing to teach us? To show us how you accomplish transcendence through cooperation instead of domination? The pause that followed was filled with rapid communication throughout the human fleet. Zethkar could sense the collective decision-making process as thousands of humans considered the implications of the Emperor's request. Finally, Dr. Chen responded, and her voice carried the weight of speaking for her entire species. Emperor, we'd be honored to share what we know, but cooperation requires equals, not gods and mortals. If the Korthak Empire wants to work with humanity, you'll need to accept that we're partners, not subjects. Partners. The word seemed to taste strange in the Emperor's mouth. Equals. Equals, Admiral Rodriguez confirmed. Species with different strengths, different perspectives, different capabilities. But equals in terms of basic rights, dignity, and the freedom to choose our own path. And if we agree to this partnership, what happens to our empire? It becomes something better, Dr. Chun said simply. Instead of an empire built on conquest, it becomes a civilization built on knowledge. Instead of subjects forced to submit, you have allies who choose to work with you. Emperor Thekmor was silent for long minutes, and Zethkar could sense the internal struggle as 10,000 years of absolute certainty crumbled and reformed into something new. When he spoke again, his voice carried a quality that the ambassador had never heard from a Korthak leader: humility. I need time to process this, to understand what it means to be mortal again, to consider what partnership might look like after millennia of domination. Take all the time you need, Admiral Rodriguez said. But while you're thinking, maybe consider this. Being mortal doesn't make you less valuable. It just makes you more connected to the rest of us who are figuring things out as we go. As the Korthak fleet began to power down their weapons completely and enter what appeared to be a conference formation, Zethkar realized he was witnessing something that would reshape galactic civilization forever. The humans hadn't just defeated the Korthak Empire through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had accomplished something far more profound. They had convinced gods to become people. And in doing so, they had opened the possibility for a galaxy where power was shared rather than hoarded, where cooperation replaced conquest, and where even the oldest and most powerful civilizations could learn to change. The question now was whether the rest of the galaxy would be ready for the transformation that humanity was about to unleash. 6 months after the confrontation at New Geneva, Ambassador Zethkar stood in what had once been the throne room of the Eternal Empire. The massive chamber had been transformed from a monument to divine authority into something that looked suspiciously like a university lecture hall. Where Emperor Thekmor's golden throne had once dominated the space, there were now simple workstations where Korthak and human scientists collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under the old regime. The changes throughout the galaxy had been swift and profound. Word of humanity's victory over the Korthak Empire had spread faster than light-speed communication, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees from dozens of species. But more than the military defeat, it was the nature of that victory that had captured the imagination of civilizations across known space. Humans had proven that power could be challenged, that authority based solely on fear could be overcome, and that cooperation was not weakness but strength. The psychological impact on species that had lived under Korthak dominion for millennia was revolutionary. Ambassador Zethkar, a familiar voice called from across the chamber. Emperor Thekmor approached, but the being who greeted Zethkar bore little resemblance to the cosmic deity who had once ruled through divine terror. Gone were the flowing robes of cosmic energy and the crown of crystallized starfire. Instead, Thekmor wore simple work clothes that were somehow more impressive than all his former regalia. "Former Emperor," Zethkar replied, still struggling with the appropriate forms of address for a god who had chosen mortality. "Just Thekmor, please. Or Professor Thekmor, if you prefer. I'm teaching now. Teaching consciousness physics to human graduate students. They're remarkably quick learners, though they ask far too many questions for comfort." Thekmor's expression would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Amusement mixed with genuine affection for students who challenged their instructor. Dr. Chen insisted that true learning requires the freedom to question everything, even the teacher. Around them, the collaborative research continued. Korthak consciousness manipulation technology was being combined with human innovation to create applications that neither species could have achieved alone. Medical devices that could heal at the quantum level. Communication systems that allowed direct, mind-to-mind contact across interstellar distances. Transportation methods that move consciousness itself between physical bodies separated by light years. The Galactic Council is requesting a formal report on the transformation, Zethkar said, pulling out his recording devices. They want to understand how the change happened so quickly. Thekmor gestured toward a group of mixed-species researchers who were intensely discussing something that involved complex mathematical equations floating in holographic displays. Fear is fast, Ambassador. When people are afraid, they accept change quickly to survive. But love is faster. When people see a better way to live, when they experience cooperation instead of domination, when they discover that they have value beyond their utility to power, the transformation is instantaneous. But surely there was resistance? 10,000 years of imperial conditioning couldn't have been overcome overnight. Oh, there was resistance, Thekmore admitted. About 30% of the imperial fleet refused to accept the new reality. They declared me mentally compromised and attempted to continue the old ways under a new emperor. Fleet Admiral Kestai claimed divine succession and tried to restore the traditional order. What happened to them? They encountered the human colony at Kepler Station. Admiral Rodriguez wasn't there, but the colonists had been learning human defensive techniques. The rebel fleet was completely neutralized within an hour. Destroyed, converted, Thekmore said with what Zethkar was learning to recognize as the human expression of gentle amusement. The humans didn't fight back with weapons. They fought back with an invitation. Zethkar's translator struggled with the concept. An invitation? They invited the rebel fleet to visit the colony, to see how humans lived when they weren't under attack, to experience cooperation instead of conquest, to discover what life could be like when power was shared instead of hoarded. And this worked. Fleet Admiral Kestai is now co-director of the Kepler Agricultural Research Institute. She's working with human farmers to develop crop strains that could thrive on worlds with different atmospheric compositions. Apparently, creating life is more satisfying than destroying it. As they talked, Dr. Sarah Chan approached from a nearby research station. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of someone who had been working on fascinating problems with brilliant colleagues. Ambassador Zethkar, she said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture. Perfect timing. We just achieved a breakthrough in consciousness transfer technology. Want to be the first non-human to experience temporary telepathic communion with a Korthak researcher? Is that safe? Completely. The connection is voluntary and limited. You'll share thoughts and perspectives for about 10 minutes, then return to your normal consciousness. It's quite enlightening. Zethkar considered the offer. 6 months ago, the idea of allowing a Korthak into his mind would have been terrifying. The ancient species had been known to dominate weaker minds, enslaving entire populations through mental manipulation. The difference, Thekmore said, apparently reading his hesitation, is consent. In the old empire, we took what we wanted from other minds. Now we share what we choose to share. The experience is transformative. How so? When you truly understand another being's perspective, when you experience their thoughts and feelings as your own, it becomes impossible to see them as inferior or threatening. Empathy at that level creates bonds that transcend species barriers. Against his better judgment, Zethkar agreed to the experiment. Dr. Chun led him to a comfortable chair surrounded by sophisticated monitoring equipment, while a young Korthak researcher named Veldar prepared for the connection. Just relax, Dr. Chun said, activating the system. Let the connection form naturally. Don't try to control it or resist it. Just experience. The sensation began slowly, like a gentle warmth spreading through his mind. Then, suddenly, Zethkar wasn't alone in his consciousness. Another presence was there, foreign but not threatening, offering its thoughts and memories for examination. Through Veldar's memories, he experienced what it was like to grow up in the Korthak Empire. The suffocating weight of divine authority, the constant fear of disappointing cosmic gods, the isolation that came from believing your species was fundamentally superior to all others. But he also felt the wonder of consciousness expansion, the joy of touching cosmic forces, the deep satisfaction of understanding reality at its most fundamental level. In return, he shared his own experiences, the fluid grace of Veltar society, the satisfaction of diplomatic problem-solving, the wonder of discovering new species and cultures throughout the galaxy. When the connection ended, both beings sat in silence for several minutes, processing what they had experienced. "How do you feel?" Dr. Chen asked. "Different," Zethkar admitted. "I understand now why the transformation happened so quickly. When you truly know another being, really know them, it becomes impossible to see them as an enemy." Veldar nodded agreement. "I experienced emotions I didn't know existed. The Veltar concept of flowing harmony, it's beautiful. I understand why your people became diplomats instead of conquerors. And I understand the Korthak drive for cosmic understanding. The desire to touch the fundamental forces of reality. It's not about power over others. It's about connection with existence itself." Dr. Chun made notes on her tablet with satisfaction. "This is exactly what we hoped would happen. Consciousness-sharing technology doesn't just allow communication between species. It creates understanding that transcends biological and cultural barriers." "Is this how you plan to transform the galaxy?" Zethkar asked. "Not transform," she corrected. "Enable. We're not trying to make everyone like humans. We're trying to make it possible for every species to understand each other well enough to cooperate instead of compete." "And it's working?" Thekmore answered from nearby. "Ambassador, in the 6 months since the New Geneva incident, we've had 17 former Korthak client species petition to join the cooperative research programs. The Zelanthe hive mind has requested assistance in developing individual consciousness capabilities. The Crystalline Collective wants to learn human emotional processing techniques. Even the militant species, especially the militant species. It turns out that most aggressive behavior stems from fear and misunderstanding. When you can directly experience another being's perspective, you realize that everyone is just trying to survive and thrive in the best way they know how." Dr. Chin looked up from her tablet with an expression that Zethkar was learning to associate with human excitement about new possibilities. "Ambassador, would you be willing to take a message back to the Galactic Council?" "Of course. Tell them that humanity formally requests permission to establish consciousness-sharing centers in every major star system. We want to offer the technology freely to any species that's interested in trying it. The Council will be concerned about the implications." "They should be excited about the implications," Thekmore interjected. "For the first time in galactic history, we have a technology that makes war genuinely obsolete. Not through superior firepower or deterrent effect, but by making it impossible for beings to see each other as enemies once they truly understand each other." Zethkar considered this. "What about species that prefer isolation, or those whose psychology is genuinely incompatible with others?" "Then they can remain isolated," Dr. Chen said simply. "Consciousness sharing requires consent from all parties. We're not trying to force unity. We're offering the option of understanding. And if someone uses the technology maliciously, if they try to dominate or control, the system has built-in safeguards," Veldar explained. "Malicious intent creates psychological dissonance that breaks the connection immediately. You can't use empathy technology for harm. It's self-limiting." As Zethkar prepared to leave the former Imperial Palace, now transformed into a center of cooperative learning, he reflected on the changes he had witnessed. 6 months ago, the galaxy had been poised on the brink of a war that could have destroyed civilizations. The Korthak Empire had seemed like an unstoppable force of divine authority, while humanity had appeared to be a dangerous wild card that threatened galactic stability. Instead, the confrontation had revealed something that no one had expected: the possibility of transformation so profound that former enemies could become partners, former gods could become teachers, and former subjects could become equals. "Ambassador," Dr. Chen called as he reached the departure bay. "One more thing for your report." "Yes. Tell the Council that this is just the beginning. Consciousness sharing is only the first step. We're working on technologies that will allow species to temporarily adopt each other's biological characteristics, to experience different forms of existence, to literally walk in each other's shoes or tentacles or energy matrices or whatever. The goal: a galaxy where every being understands that diversity isn't a threat to be eliminated, but a resource to be celebrated. Where cooperation isn't a sign of weakness, but the foundation of strength. Where the question isn't, how do we defeat our enemies, but how do we turn potential enemies into friends? As Zethkar's ship departed for the Galactic Council chambers, he looked back at the former seat of the Korthak Empire. The massive structures still gleamed with their characteristic golden light, but the harsh divine radiance had been replaced by something warmer, more welcoming. He thought about the message he would deliver to the Council, about the resistance he would face from species that profited from conflict and division, about the challenges of implementing such radical changes across thousands of different civilizations. But he also thought about the look in Veldar's eyes when a young Korthak had experienced Veltar emotional harmony for the first time. He thought about former Emperor Thekmor teaching human students about consciousness physics with genuine joy. He thought about the possibility of a galaxy where understanding replaced fear, where cooperation replaced conquest, and where the vast diversity of intelligent life could work together to achieve things that no single species could imagine. And for the first time in his 3 centuries of diplomatic service, Ambassador Zethkar felt something he had never experienced before: hope for the future of galactic civilization. The humans, it seemed, had not just defeated gods. They had shown gods how to become something better than divine. They had shown them how to become truly alive.